The new world's hardest tongue twister, sex changes, Down syndrome, being fat, and overcoming adversity. That's the subject of today's podcast. Let's do it.
This is the Brett Mason Show. Hey, hey, hey. My name is Brett. This is my show. This is my show.
Hey, happy Friday. Welcome into the big Let's Get Happy About the Weekend podcast. I am your host, Brett Mason. Thanks for listening. Boy, we had the biggest week ever with the podcast this week, and thanks in no small part to my guest. Look, I've learned the secret to being a successful podcaster. You can be really bad at it, but just have guests that people love on your podcast. Amy Pollard, of course, was on earlier in the week. We had Bud and Broadway on. Those guys are a hoot. And so thanks to everybody that was on, and I'm looking for more guests. Look, if you would like to be on the podcast, you can shoot me an email. Info, at brettmason.com, brettmason.com, info at brettmason.com. Or you can just shoot me a message on the Facebook page. Just use the little send message feature there. That's probably the best way. If you want to be on the show or you know somebody that you think would be a great guest, boy, I'd love to have them on. This week was a pretty good week. Me and my mom have done more things together probably since, my father passed. We're coming up on 5 years of that. Coming up on 5 years. It's so hard to think, weird to think about. And then, of course, my mom has been victorious over a diagnosis that nobody wants to get so far. And so we've done things we probably in the past would not have normally done, and this week was one of those. I actually accompanied my mom down to the beach, which was interesting, so that was fun. I tell you, I just love the waves. I love the waves. I'm not your sun worshiper type. I don't like the sun too much, but I love the beach. I love the beach at night. And let me tell you, the other people on the beach are real happy that I love it at night, because if you haven't seen me in a Speedo, there's something you don't want to see. When you think about it, do you really want to see anybody in a Speedo? So that was a good time, and for most people, probably been a boring time. I'm a boring guy. Of course, my mom is she's quite mature. My mom's a lot of fun, and she's adventurous, and she's up for just about anything within reason, as long as she can have a modicum of decency about her and keep her self-respect. She's up for doing things. She does more than I do. My mom does way more stuff than I do. When I grow up, I want to be more like my mom. That's my goal in life. So what I'm going to talk about on the show today, start out talking about this new tongue twister. Uberfacts is one of the places that I look for little factoids and tidbits of information that I find interesting, and I think other people might find interesting. As I was growing up, we pretty much had the one standby tongue twister, didn't we? Did you have the same one? She sells seashells by the seashore. She sells seashells by the seashore was the one that we had the problem with. According to Uberfacts, the new hardest tongue twister to say is "pad kid poured curd pulled cod," which I don't think is as hard as "she sells seashells by the seashore," because the "C" and the "she" get confusing, and you want to say one in place of the other, which makes it really hard. Pad kid poured curd pulled cod. I guess poured and pulled and curd and cod are plays off each other. Pad kid, I don't think that means anything. So try saying it. Comment below if you did it 3 times real fast with no problem. Pad kid poured. Okay, now that I've said it's easy, I can do it. Pad kid poured curd pulled cod. Pad kid poured curd pulled cod. Pad kid poured curd pulled cod. And compare that with "she sells seashells by the seashore. She sells seashells by the seashore. She sells seashells by the seashore." So yeah, that was a lot harder for me. The old one, I think it's hard to beat the old one. But I could be wrong. If the new one is harder for you, then, comment in there and let me know. Maybe I just can't talk, which would be ironic considering most of my professional career has involved talking for a living. So earlier this week, Twitter broke all kind of new records when that Bruce Jenner became Caitlyn. And I don't have a problem with that. I know there's a lot of people out there screaming, you are what you were born and blah, blah. And I just don't think that's 100% true. I have personally known two people who were born with issues. I mean, real issues like physical, medical issues. And so I'm going to say their names and I'm going to call them out. Actually, I don't believe either one of those people are with us anymore. But I do know that their lives were difficult and challenging. And, everybody that says you were born perfect and you are what you are, I'm sorry, but that just isn't true. It just isn't true. People are born imperfect all the time. That doesn't mean you can't love them perfectly, and that means you shouldn't accept them perfectly, and that doesn't mean that you shouldn't embrace them in all perfectness and all love. But that doesn't mean that they're perfect. People are born with imperfections. Now, you can argue what is an imperfection, and I would say imperfection doesn't necessarily have a negative connotation to it. Probably one of the best and biggest examples out there is folks with Down syndrome. If you look back, you don't even have to go back 20 years or further. Bad connotation with Down syndrome. And, folks with Down syndrome were really made fun of. It was assumed that folks with Down syndrome couldn't really accomplish all that much. And times have changed. I mean, there's been a couple of really successful sitcoms on TV where one of the co-starring cast members had Down syndrome. Facebook has just blown up the past few weeks. I mean, I think it was last week. That's just about all I saw on Facebook was about this one kid with Down syndrome who's now become a model. And more power to her. I think that's awesome. She's very attractive, too. The one thing she did do that I noticed, and maybe this is just me, but there's some things that bug me, and maybe they shouldn't. But apparently she was just a tad overweight by conventional standards. And she's a gorgeous girl. Down syndrome, obviously intelligent, obviously bright, obviously pretty. The thing was I saw these posts about how she overcame negative stereotypes, and she overcame, negative to be a successful model when she said in an interview she had to lose, I think it was 15 pounds, or it wasn't a lot, 15 or 20 pounds. And so on the one hand, I was very proud and excited, and I'm like, go girl, for breaking the stereotype of Down syndrome. But you gave in to the stereotype of weight. You broke down one stereotype, but you gave in to another stereotype. But of course, we have people breaking those stereotypes too. That girl that signed that contract here recently, big girl. Oh, she's a big girl. I think she was like 5'5" and weighs 300 pounds or something. Big girl, just tattoos. She's gorgeous. She just kicked the door right down, did she? She just barely, and that sounds like that's not intended to be a pun, or that's not intended to be a play on her weight. I didn't mean it that way at all. So please don't take it that way. But she just kicked the door in. It's like, look, I'm pretty. I have something to offer. There's other women that are large, and they want to see me, and they want to see beautiful large women. I'm torn on this whole thing. Being a fat guy since I was old enough to even remember, I think I have a unique perspective, and I think I can pretty much say anything I want on the issue of weight. You may think that that's not true, and you may think that I have to limit what I say, but I think I can. I put up with the alienation, and I put up with the being made fun of, and I pulled up with the pranks, and I put up with the being, felt lower than pond scum many times in school, right on up through early adulthood. I'll tell you one of the biggest revelations to me is I at a point in time in my past, recent past, I'll say within the last 20 years, I'm not going to narrow it down much more than that, but I had the ability to be really close with what you would call quote unquote really attractive people. A guy and a woman too, especially the woman, but the guy as well, both of them. Even more than them. There's a couple more, but these two particularly come to mind. And they're just really attractive. And they're not just attractive, they're also outgoing. Of course, I have a theory about that. The more attractive you are and the more accepted you are instantly visually, you're automatically going to be outgoing because the world that you view is not the same world that I have viewed as a fat guy. And you can say what you want about that. You can say that I'm dreaming it. You can say that it's in my head, but it's not. People just view you differently. They automatically assume you smell. They automatically assume you're lazy. They automatically assume that you have no self-control. They just assume a lot of things. And so that's just instant perception that you get. On the other hand, and this I learned from hanging out with these other people. I remember me and this one particular person, there was a business, I'm not going to say what business, but there was a business that I frequented a lot. Back during this time. This was several years ago. And I went to this business, not every week, but maybe every couple of weeks. I knew everybody in there by name. They knew me. And our relationship was cordial. I liked the people in there, and I thought they were okay, but they were never what I would call super nice to me. They were just the minimum level of polite. I'll say that. They were never rude to me. They may have been behind my back, and Lord knows that's happened plenty in my life. But they were never rude to me, so I'm not going to say that. But when I started hanging out with one of these other people I'm talking about, she had never been to this business before, ever, and we had an occasion to go in there together. And she walked in the door ahead of me. I'm going to tell you, from walking behind her and seeing people's reaction to her coming in the door, just blew my mind. I'm like, are these people drunk today? Like, I've never seen them react to a customer like this before, ever. And as I stood there and, I introduced one of them to the person I was with, and their demeanor and their eagerness to help and their eagerness to get in there. And it wasn't just men because she was a woman. It was women, too. It was all the employees were the same. It was just blowing my mind. And I remember later that night when I was back at home by myself, I remember that night thinking, what? Are the worlds really that different? And so this is how bad it was. I forced myself to go back in there the next day and get something I didn't even need because I didn't want to wait a week because whatever mood they were in or whatever vibe was happening, I was hoping they would still be in that same vibe so I could eliminate that, if that makes sense. Like, they could have been having a really good day that day and it would have been the same if I went. So I went the next day, and it was right back to the old. They were just they were cordial, but it was by no means the same. And over the course of for one of these people that I hung out with, it lasted 10 or 12 years. The other one, it lasted about 5 years. But over the course of that time, all these places that we would go that I had been by myself before and that we would revisit with them, either the guy or the girl, it was always so fascinating to me, the difference with which they were perceived, or which we were perceived, the way we were treated, the way we were responded to, just the countenance on people's faces would be like, I'm polite to you because I have to be, and I'm not being rude, but I'm not going out of my way to be happy, to just being like, wow, hey, let me do something for you. So I don't mean that to sound, I'm one of the last people in the world to say you make up excuses for anything, because I think you make your own way in life. I think you kick your way through the door and you do whatever. And if one group of people slows you down or stops you, you can still try to get through that wall if you want, but you try to find a way around. You find another group of people. You find your path. And I'm a firm believer in that. I don't think there's any excuses. I came from one of the poorest places on earth. Some of the greatest people in the world live where I was born. Just amazing people, but poor. Just most everybody was poor, my parents included. I did not have the liberty of having an indoor bathroom or indoor plumbing, period, until I was 8. And I'm not old. Like, I'm not a 70-year-old person. This wasn't that many years ago. And so I know what it's like to grow up poor, believe me. But one of the things I watched was my mom and dad. I was very fortunate to have great examples in my parents, because my parents, they had, they didn't have too many things in their favor. They had a lot of things working against them. But my parents, and especially my mom, I'll give my dad credit later on, but in the early years, it was all my mom. Because my dad was a great guy. My dad was one of the hardest workers ever. My dad had one of the biggest hearts ever. And, for all of my dad's life that I really remember, because, I don't have memories too much before I was 5 or 6. And he was, for the most part, on the straight and narrow and being who I always knew him to be then. But before then, he was basically a kid. Him and my mom were basically kids, and they were thrust into adulthood with a baby. And my mom became very adult. And my mom became a saver, a penny pincher. This is how we're going to get by. This is what we're going to do. And it took my dad a few years to catch on to that game plan. So I give my mom the fullest amount of credit, and then I give my dad 90% credit, 95% credit. But, if you see my dad, my dad's passed now. I'm coming on the 5-year anniversary. But if you see what they accomplished for themselves, they wound up with a nice place. They built the house my mom always wanted. They got all these buildings and vehicles and tractors and motorcycles and things that when I was 10, I would have never dreamed would have ever been in our family. I just would have never have dreamed that. That seemed like things other people had. My dad would buy these used cars because, and this was when I was 10, 12, 13, 14. After we had moved up some, and so we were in a house that actually had indoor plumbing, and they both had jobs or whatever. So it was a little bit better, but it was far from being great. But my dad was a mechanic, so he would buy these cars when they needed a car. He would find a car, and it really would be a wreck. But my dad would always talk it up like, "Oh, this is a good car here. We just, it just needs a little work on it." And that's the way it was. I remember one time in particular, my dad came home in this red car. I don't remember what it was, but I just know it was red. And I remember him pulling up into the driveway. They've actually paved the road that runs in front of my parents' house now, but up all through my childhood and up until just a few years ago, it was all dirt roads down there. And in the summer when it's dry, well, that dust would just roll in. So I remember, I knew my dad was going in the car, and I don't know how old I was, 10, maybe 8, 9, 10. And I remember seeing that red car pull in and this cloud of dust behind it. And, you're like a kid. You're like, oh, we got a new car. And I remember getting in that car, and inside that car, there was so much dust. Just dust everywhere. Well, the car had a hole in the trunk or a hole in the floorboard had rusted through or something. And so as I was driving, all that dust was just coming in through that car. And, that was the car we had at that time. But, later on, as you plug away in life, my mom was very frugal. She would spend the minimum amount of money possible. She would save. We wore hand-me-down clothes. My mom would get clothing patterns, which is something I don't even see. I don't know the last time I saw or heard of anybody with a clothing pattern, but my mom would have like a shirt pattern, and she would go buy this cheap thing of cloth from the dollar store, and she would lay that out with that pattern, and she would hop on an old sewing machine, and she would sew me a shirt. That's where my shirts came from. And so everything was hand-me-down or made or whatever. But my mom did everything. She knew he only had a certain amount of money. They didn't go in debt, which they probably couldn't have got a credit account for many years. They just plugged away. They grew their own gardens. God, I hated that. But that's where most of the food came from, and generosity from others. And then they pulled themselves up from their bootstraps. So I give you the story of my parents to say that it's because I saw it and I lived it, and I see how you can overcome pretty much anything if you put your mind to it. But I don't make excuses for what we started out talking about, and that's weight or, we're talking about, being born with quote unquote disabilities or whatever. There's nothing that says those things won't slow you down. There's nothing that says those things won't hinder you, but they don't have to stop you. You just have to work harder. You have to be a little bit more intelligent. You have to think about it more. You have to figure out a way around, a way through, a way over, a way under. Whereas a lot of people just walk right straight in. But there's many ways into a situation. Just like there's many ways into a house. You can crack your way in through the roof or through a window or through any of the 2 or 3 doors the house may have. And some people just walk right through the front door and they're welcomed in with open arms. And this is going to make this sound like something from a burglar or something. I don't mean it that way. But some of us, we have to figure out a way to work our way in through a back window or squeeze our way in. But that doesn't mean you can't get in. It doesn't mean you shouldn't try to get in. It shouldn't mean you should give up on getting in. This has turned into an inspirational thing. I don't know how inspirational it's been. That was not the direction I was going to take the podcast today. Allow me to look at the official time and see how much time I've wasted on the podcast today. Well, 20 minutes. So I'm not sure what else to say about that other than to say people who are born differently and they have challenges, I try to understand it. We started out talking about Bruce Jenner, who's Caitlyn now. I don't know how Bruce was born. I don't know how Bruce's body has felt all these years. Bruce, not everybody is born the same. And so I don't judge Bruce Jenner. It's weird, but just because something is weird doesn't make it wrong. Just so something is weird doesn't mean you should judge it. And just because something is weird doesn't mean you should proclaim that you have all knowledge about it, because you don't. I don't. You don't. And so I wish that guy all the best. I hope it works out for him. I hope that, whatever he hopes to feel, accomplish, achieve, experience in life is good for him. As it's the same thing that I hope for you and your entire family, because we're all weird and we all have weird hopes and dreams. And I think we all deserve to hopefully achieve them. Look, I hope you have a fantastic weekend. I hope this podcast hasn't been too weird and boring. It went in a completely different direction than I intended. But, boys, I love doing it, and I love you guys listening, and I hope you have a fantastic weekend. We'll talk to you next week.
This is the Brett Mason Show. Hey, hey, hey! My name is Brett. This is my show. This is my show.